If you're participating in this session as part of the HFTP Leadership Class of 2022, thank you for attending today. If you registered today and you're not part of the leadership class, please note that you can visit the virtual education page to register for each of the LES sessions individually. Thank you to everybody attending the session today. One announcement about the Leadership Excellence Series is the book club sessions in April and July have been announced. The book club session number 1 is our April 21st session. It will be at 10 a.m. Central Time to accommodate Michael Levy, who is in Amsterdam. So join HFTP Global Past President Michael Levy, CHTP, as he hosts the session on Blue Ocean Shift. Do you want to start reading the book for the session? I have posted information on how to obtain that book in the community. I want to continue to encourage you to be interactive in the community if you're participating in the LES session. I've noticed a little bit of a drop in the exchange. So maybe today, or the next week, go ahead and plan on reaching out to some of the other participants. We appreciate that. Also, Mark Pate, HFTP Global President, is going to be leading our book session in July. And that information will be posted next week on Risk Forward by Victoria LaBaum is the book. And we have gotten a separate link for that. So look out for that information next week. Before we begin the presentation, I will review a few items about the format of today's broadcast and the Zoom platform. Today's event is being recorded, and a link to the recording of the discussion will be available on the HFTP website too, and in the community. We are using the question and answer icon at the bottom of your screen and the chat feature. Please post your questions to our speaker through the question and answer icon and say hello and join in the discussion through the chat. On the upper right of your screen, there are several options to view today's webinar. We recommend using this side-by-side view to maximize today's presentation. I want to start by announcing that this is the first topic webinar within the HFTP Leadership Excellence Series. Topic webinars explore current issues affecting the workplace environment. Workplace generational differences are often responsible for conflict and miscommunication in the workplace. But generational differences need not divide the workplace. The key to working with different generations lies in our ability to understand the generational motivations and values. Leadership is being able to appreciate and use these differences to enhance the workplace environment. Josh Bergen, CHAE, CHTP, will moderate today's topic and introduce our expert speakers, Kara Soletto of Magnet Culture. Handing it over to you now, Josh.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining, and thank you for participating and being part of these sessions. When HFTP reached out to me, and we were talking about this topic, one of the reasons why I joined HFTP was to hang around people that are smarter than me, like all of the people that are attending this session. So on that note, we have Kara Soletto here. And she is somebody that I look up to when it comes to this topic. So go to where the experts are. Do you often wonder what planet your coworkers are from? Or are you frustrated with people saying millennial like it's a bad thing? If you'd like to better understand those around you from all generations, you're in the right place. Generational expert Kara Soletto named a game changer by Workforce Magazine. Recruiter.com listed her in their top 10 company culture experts to watch. She's the author of the book, Staying Power, Why Your Employees Leave and How to Keep Them Longer. And her MBA allows her to quantify the costs and issues caused by excessive employee turnover, as we all know, in the hospitality industry. As the president of the Chief Retention Officer of Magnet Culture, Kara works with the clients across the country to bridge the generational gaps in the workplace and reduce their unnecessary employee turnover. She will speak much more eloquently than I have the ability to read. As most of you know, I freelance everything. But please join me in welcoming workforce thought leader, tackler of turnover, and the entitled millennial herself, Sarah. So yay.
Awesome. Thank you, Josh. No problem. No problem. Hey, when I have to read stuff that's handed to me, it's a lot more difficult than just winging it, right? So awesome. Awesome. Well, I'm thrilled to be here today with you all and to focus on not just the generational dynamics that we're seeing in the workplace, but also we have expanded our work into all things retention. Why do people stay? Why do people go? And so I wanted to start today's generational conversation with a little bit bigger picture questions and some insights into what's going on with the work world and what does that look like. And then, of course, I'll dive into some of the dynamics from a generational standpoint. So hope that's okay that we're going to start there. But first things first is I just hear a lot of assumptions going around about why people quit. Oh, they'll just go anywhere for 50 cents more an hour or things like that, that they just, don't want to work. They're lazy, that type of thing. And so I wanted to address, I work with organizations all across the US and all different industries. So I do have clients in the hospitality space, but one of my clients in particular, we had some really great insights that are totally transferable to everyone. And that was a concrete company, the ready mix trucks that spin. We have a ready mix concrete client. And when we talked to the managers, they said people quit for better pay and better schedules. All right, that's it. Better pay, better schedules. And by the way, now that I've shared my screen, if you haven't switched over your view to side-by-side speaker view, that's probably your best bet. So you'll be able to see me and the PowerPoint today. All right, so we thought, the managers thought that it was because of pay and schedules were the primary, if not only, reasons that people were quitting. And yet we went and talked to the drivers themselves, the employees themselves. All right. Now, I was fascinated by what they actually said to us, which was totally different things, such as there's no staff meetings. There's no communication. It's just you hear what you hear when you hear it, if you're lucky. And they didn't actually have shift huddles and scheduled staff meetings and things like that. So that was very frustrating. And it's very eye-opening to the management that they realized, oh, wow. I mean, we thought we were communicating just fine to people, but they're telling us they always feel like they're the last ones to know something. All right. And nobody wants to be the last one to know things. So that was a big frustration. They also said the bosses were degrading and play favorites. Now, I've seen this at every single industry and almost every company, that there's some boss, some supervisor that's just not treating their people with respect and really playing the game very well with all of their team members fairly. Okay, so big issue there, making sure that our bosses, our supervisors, our directors, everybody is really, really a magnetic personality that attracts staff versus repels them. Okay, and then the big one was they said the truck, which we'll replace that word in a moment, the truck you get as a rookie is a joke. Well, if we're in different industries, we can say the shift you get as a rookie is a joke, or the workload you get as a rookie is a joke. We can swap that out for different things and just realize that the rookies in this instance, which I would never call new hires rookies, but this was their words, they felt like the rookies got the crumbs of what was left. After everyone else got to pick their shifts or their equipment, then they got what was left. Well, right now, who's the flight risk? It's the new hires. It is the rookies who are absolutely this position that continues to just churn and churn and churn. So we really need to make sure that we know our people, okay, that we get to know our people and that we are making it a better onboarding experience, a better new hire experience, and that we're not using an old school, outdated, hierarchical kind of chain of seniority type of thing. We have to be very careful that we're not always giving the new hires the last pick on their shifts and their jobs and what they get to do each day, because that is going to drive them away even faster, okay? Now, a lot of folks have asked about the Great Resignation, and I love that Josh has this new tag of the Great Stay. We're trying to shift the conversation, shift the narrative there around, let's convince people to stay longer, right? That's where we want to go next. So we have kind of talked to folks, we've looked around. Now, I've been doing retention and generational work for almost 10 years now, and it is clear as day to me what the problems are and the reason that the staff have had enough and are finally walking away in this Great Resignation that's happening right now, okay? The first one is that many of them are simply beyond capacity. We have crept up our workloads to more. And if one more CEO says to me, we have to do more with less, I might just scream because we can no longer do more with less when we have already squeezed our resources as tight as absolutely possible. Okay. So one is that a lot of people are beyond their capacity and they're saying enough is enough. Two, people have choices. Who's hiring today? Everybody. So not just within hospitality, but even outside of hospitality, almost every industry is either backfilling the positions from turnover or they're growing or both. So people have choices. They can quit their job today and go find another job tomorrow. They also have more comparison data, more comparison information and access to how much do other people make. I'm seeing people not just job hop, but industry hop because they're saying, oh, well, I could make more in healthcare or manufacturing or hospitality, right? And they're just moving around completely different industries, which didn't happen very much decades ago, all right? Not only, let me bring to light, not only are people comparing wages, which is where so many people are upset right now, we just can't compete with wages. Well, they're not only competing against wages, but people are starting to compare the workload that they have to do for those wages. So if you're talking to your friend and both parties make, say, $15 an hour, they're going to compare how hard they have to work for that $15 an hour. And they may deem that it's not fair that I have to do this much work while you do this much work for the same amount of money, or vice versa, right? Absolutely, that comparison is happening now as well. Even how dirty is a job or how laborious is a job? Is it going to hurt my back at the end of the day? Things like that. People are comparing not just the wages, but also the workload and the job itself. Okay. And then on top of that, we have the most confident workforce that is absolutely willing to change. They see that the grass is greener on the other side. Everybody's hiring. So I'm going to jump. And if that doesn't work, I'll find something else. I'll land on my own 2 feet. So the confidence over the last several years has really just skyrocketed, which has given people even more of that oomph to go and try something different. Okay. So these are kind of the 4 C's of why we see the Great Resignation happening right now, coming out of the first 2 years of the pandemic here, and why they're job hopping as much as they are. All right. Now, I mentioned workloads and being beyond capacity, and I want to share with you, especially if clearly many folks on the call today sit in the finance seat. So I want to talk for a moment about realistic workloads and how is that even connected to our budgets or our bottom line. Now, one of my clients is a hotel management group that has about 40 properties. And when I was talking to the chief operating officer, he said that their room attendants and housekeeping teams they are struggling. They cannot keep people for very long, if at all. And so I asked him about their job and their workload. And certainly they're terribly understaffed right now because of the workforce crisis and workforce shortage in many cases. But I wanted to find out, what was the workload like years ago, a decade ago, even 2 decades ago, versus what is the expected workload today, and even just over the past 2 or 3 years? How different is that from 10 or 20 years ago? Well, he explained to me that many, many years ago, they expected a person to clean about 12 to 14 rooms in one 8-hour shift. That was pretty much the average and the expectation. But then they figured out that their rock star room attendants, well, they could do 16 rooms in a shift. And so instead of just celebrating the 16 and rewarding those rock star room attendants, instead, they shifted everyone's expectations up to 16 because they said, well, she can do 16. Everybody should be able to do 16. And so they shifted everybody's expectations to that. And you can imagine over time, those expectations just continue to creep up when you've got somebody else who can do 17 or more than that, right? And then we've gotten into the workforce crisis where we are truly short-staffed. And he was telling me recently that now they need the room attendants to clean 18 rooms per shift. Okay, well, that's never really been possible, even with former rock stars. But also my next question was, okay, well, but wait a minute, Chuck, what about the new hires? Now, the new hires, they're not expected to do 18 right out the gate, are they? And he said, well, yeah, we have to. That's what we need. And immediately you could see the light go off above his head where he realized that's why they're quitting. We have unrealistic expectations in place based on our spreadsheets, of our staffing and our productivity and all of these numbers that we're crunching behind the scenes. And yet we have not built a sustainable model. And we haven't even built in a learning curve for our folks that are new. Okay. Now, also in this same light, just recently, I was driving down the highway and I have a 7-year-old son who was sitting in the back seat. And he saw that a car was on the side of the road. Well, I said, or he asked me why it was on the side of the road. And I could clearly tell from my view up front that they had blown a tire. Well, that happens a lot in the US, by the way. Not as much in other countries from having lived overseas, but in the US, you see people blow tires quite a bit. Now, my son, when I said, well, they blew a tire, my 7-year-old son freaked out in the back seat and almost started crying, saying, Mommy, are our tires going to blow up? And then I realized I should have used more tact when I explained that to my kiddo. So he freaked out, and my immediate response was, no, honey, there's no way that our tires are going to blow up because we get regular maintenance. We take our cars, his dad and I, we both take our cars into the shop on the regular basis. And when they tell us that we need new tires, we get new tires, right? And so it made me realize that in the business world as well, that's what we're doing right now. We're running on overused tires that we just keep driving on. We can't even slow down. We just have to go, 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 go. And we haven't stopped for maintenance. We haven't stopped to upgrade and to get up to date on what we need to and things like that. So it was an immediate connection for me in that humans, just like the machines that we operate and the computers that we use and those types of things, we also need maintenance and upgrades. We need better tools over time. And yet a lot of times, again, when we're crunching numbers behind the scenes about productivity and profitability and things like that, we sometimes forget that we need to give our people downtime. And I just mean downtime as in not productive in their role, getting their job done, but it is still necessary time that should be on the clock. So basic things like training and mentoring, vacation and paid time off, we want people to take time off to recharge and reset and refresh, okay? Many times I'm seeing that people in management, they don't even have time for planning and strategy and looking ahead because they're so busy doing the job because their workloads are out of whack, right? And then, of course, we need time for team building. So this is part of why the generational conversation has gotten so difficult, because we're not even spending the time to do very much team building and building camaraderie among our team members, right? There's just no time. We're all so busy and understaffed and have to just do our job, okay? So I'm really glad that everybody's here today to talk about the generational dynamics in the workplace, because we need to focus on building stronger teams and bridging those generational gaps that we see, okay? Now, feel free throughout this presentation, put your questions in the chat or the Q&A box. I may be able to answer some of them in real time, or I'll leave some time at the end to answer questions as well, okay? All right, so here we go. We are very judgy. We are extremely judgmental people, whether we like it or not. It's just how we're wired. And if you think about it, if somebody's driving down the highway a lot faster than you are driving, you're going to think, oh, they're going too fast. That's dangerous. And then if somebody's driving too slow in front of you, you're saying, come on, hit the gas. You're going too slow. And we think those people who drive faster or slower than us are ridiculous, okay? Because we, like me, I bet you're like me, we drive the perfect speed, okay? Not always the exact posted speed limit that's out there, but we drive what's appropriate in the moment, and anyone faster or slower is crazy, okay? So we need to realize that we have that kind of judgment every day, all day. If somebody works more hours than us, they're a workaholic and need to get a life. If someone works less hours than us, they're lazy. They need to work harder. They have no work ethic, right? That type of mentality. Even about the way people dress, we judge people about the words that come out of their mouth, all kinds of different ways that we judge. And what's interesting is every person was raised differently. Every person had different exposure to different kinds of parents. You know, sometimes I find a lot of times, in particular with lower wage workers, lower wage frontline workers, sometimes we're hiring folks who didn't even have parents that showed them what professionalism looks like, okay? That showed them how important it is to get up and get to work on time and respect your boss and use polite language and things like that. Some of the people we're hiring today never had role models to show them what that looks like, okay? So we have to reduce our judgment and become better mentors at bridging some of these gaps, okay? In fact, I use the word professionalism and work ethic, right? But I need you to be very, very clear that both professionalism and work ethic are subjective, my friends. It is your opinion whether you think my purple hair that I have here is professional or unprofessional. And if I showed you my tattoos, you would decide whether I should show those at work because you deem them either professional or unprofessional. And that is your opinion about that, okay? So Emily was asking for strategies to recognize and address judgment. What we want to try to do is, as now that you acknowledge, right, you have been enlightened and acknowledge now that professionalism is defined by every single person in a different way. Some people think, oh, I don't mind her purple hair as long as she shows up on time. And other people say, you know, I really don't care if people are 5 or 10 minutes late, but I could never hire somebody with purple hair because my guests will not accept that. It's just unprofessional. Okay. So every single person has their own definition of that, and it's built on the way they were raised. It's built on what their parents, their grandparents, and their first bosses taught them about professionalism and work ethic. And I get some pushback on work ethic sometimes, but think about this. The millennial generation is known for wanting to work smarter, not harder. So sometimes I can get more done than somebody else because I automated it, or because I found a software that would do it for me instead of manually, right? So it doesn't mean that I don't have strong work ethic. I'm going to get the job done, but I might be able to do it faster in a different way. All right. So yes, but as far as Emily's question about how do you recognize judgment, it's about switching your mindset to be more curious rather than critical. Anytime, okay, so I'll give you an example here. Anytime you think to yourself things like this, you ready? You ready? All right. She should know better. Or I shouldn't have to tell her, right? I shouldn't have to explain that. Oh, here's my favorite phrase of judgment. That's just common sense. Everybody knows that, right? If you hear or say those kind of things, that's your trigger that, oh my goodness, oh, you know what? They can't read my mind. They can't read my mind, okay? And so people were raised differently than you were. So let me share an example here. At my first job, which was actually at an office, it wasn't in the hospitality field, but I worked at an office with about 10 people. No one told me that I had to keep my shoes on all day. Okay. Now, I know some of you are being judgy. Some of you are thinking, she should know better. Who does that? Who would take their shoes off at the office, right? Well, I didn't think anything of it, and it was not in the handbook. It was not covered during orientation. And the 10 of us, we all worked together every day. So we were pretty close and pretty friendly. And in my office, unlike your world, we didn't have visitors coming in very often. You know, and maybe for you, that's the case if you sit in an office behind the scenes type of job. And so I would just walk to the copier barefoot, and I didn't think anything of it, except for 2 ladies in my office thought that was completely inappropriate, unprofessional, just immature. And so do you know who they told? Everybody except me. How immature and inappropriate and unprofessional I was being because they had unwritten expectations that I didn't know about. So to answer the question about how do we reduce that judgment, it is to be aware of how judgy we are being, first of all. And if you use those triggers of she should know better, I shouldn't have to tell her that. That's just common sense. If we think about those things and instead we flip it around to be more curious of, I've never thought about taking my shoes off at the office. I wonder why she thinks that's okay. And then taking the next step is the mentorship. So it took one of my peers, not my boss, a peer came to me and said, hey, Kara, you're doing such great work. And I'm pretty sure people would notice that more if you kept your shoes on all day, because people are talking about your bare feet instead of the great work that you're doing. And it's distracting from your true professionalism, right? The work I was doing was professional, but somebody thought that behavior was not. So we really have to mentor others instead of just talking about them. We need to mentor, go to them and explain how they can hit the mark more effectively. Okay, so I hope that's helpful, Emily, and to others for that particular question. That was a good one. Awesome. So before today's session, you all received, or should have received, most of you, an ebook on the millennial mindset. Okay. So today I'm going to go over a little bit of what is in that ebook, but then you can, of course, read it afterwards if you didn't get a chance before our session. But also at magnetvault.com, that's where the ebook is if you don't already have access to it. And we also have a ton of downloadable resources about generations, about retention, all kinds of things in there. So feel free to go into that treasure trove of a vault and download some great resources. Okay, awesome. So let's talk about the evolution of the generations in the workplace for a moment. So before I just jump right into some examples and things around millennials and Gen Z and that type of conversation, I want to show you the demographics and how we got to where we are today, where there's this quite a divide between the older and younger generations. And there's a lot of finger pointing and blaming and, they drive me crazy. By the way, they drive me crazy goes in both directions. So I hear the complaints in every direction on this stuff. So I want to assure you as well, I am not going to be boomer bashing or millennial bashing. I am simply going to share with you some of the demographics here and talk about how we evolved through the different generations to get to where we are today. All right. There's no right or wrong in any of this. The way you were raised gives you that unique worldview and that unique lens that you have. And so it's important as leaders, particularly leaders who are setting budgets and setting policies and things within our companies, it's important that we see both sides of how did the traditional view come to be and how did the more millennial view come to be? And then how do we find some middle common ground there, some new common ground now across this, okay? Awesome. So let's talk first about some of these demographics. Now, of course, I saw several of you are chiming in from overseas. That's fabulous. I'm going to share right now some of the US statistics. But what I have found is, of course, the birth years might be different based on when you had major societal events that changed in your country. And so you may have different numbers than we have, but a lot of times the evolution of how the workforce has evolved is still the same when I'm working with global clients, okay? So in the US, we had about 80 million baby boomers. Of course, after World War II, we had a giant boom of births at that time. And so from a workforce standpoint, because this group is now in their 60s and 70s, we're seeing that number shrink from a participating labor force standpoint because many of them are retiring. In fact, in the States, we're losing about 10,000 baby boomers a day are turning 65 in the States, and about 6,000 a day of those baby boomers are also retiring, okay? So we do have quite an influx of that. Now, with baby boomers, many baby boomers, their parents were the traditionalists and previous generations that are not working much anymore. And those generations were more punch clock generations of you show up at this time and you leave by 4:30 or 5 and that type of generation. Now, the baby boomers, on the other hand, said, wait a minute, if I work harder, I can have more. So I'm going to stay late. I'm going to go in on the weekends. I'm going to do more. I'm going to take on another project. If they were hourly workers, many of them wanted the overtime. And if they were salary workers, many of them wanted to position themselves for bonuses or promotions and to climb the career ladder. Okay. So when Gen X came in, here the baby boomers had set these heightened expectations. Remember earlier when I talked about those expanding workloads of you stay till the job gets done? Well, the Gen Xers in the US, it was a much smaller cohort. So in many cases, the Gen Xers fell in line and did what their baby boomer bosses told them because they were so much smaller and they were respectful, right? They were taught you respect your elders. Why? Because I said so. End of story. All right. So we had the following generation that oftentimes fell into the baby boomer rules and policies. For example, I've asked a ton of Gen X women whether or not they wanted to wear pantyhose ever, right? Nylon stockings. Like, did they want to wear those? No, but it was in the policies that they had to, that women had to wear hosiery of some kind, right? The stockings, the nylons, they had to wear those because that was deemed professional. Okay, so that was what that definition looked like before. So now the millennials came in, and by the way, we're not the youngest group anymore, because here in the States, the millennials are about age 25 to 40, and there's about 80 million of us. So the Gen Xers kind of got squished in between the giant bookends of boomers and millennials, okay? So then the millennials come in and we said, oh, no way am I working at a place that's going to make me wear those, right? That I would have to wear stockings, nylons, pantyhose. No way am I going to do that. And I'm going to work for a company that has lightened up their expectations and is much more flexible and gives me more choice around how I show up in the workplace. Okay. So we can see in most countries, we can see that the expectations have evolved and even become, I would say, somewhat less formal over time, particularly with attire and just expectations of how you show up in general. Okay. Now with Gen Z, this next group that is under age 25 now, that is, we're not sure exactly what the cutoff date is going to be, but here in the States, they say that that group was born after 1996. Okay. The reason that they've done that is because any children who were born after 1996 don't remember 9/11. Okay. So that's how generational breakdowns happen between one generation to the next. It's not always just 15 years or 20 years. It happens because of major events in that country's milestones, all right, in that country's culture of what happened, whether it's economic changes or war or other things like that. Major changes in that society is where we're going to decide where those cutoffs are. So we're looking at least a 70 million person Generation Z here in the States. So take a look at the demographics. If you happen to be outside the US, take a look at your demographics and see if you have a similar type of hourglass figure on the demographics, or how that may have changed over time. We do know, like I said, most of my global clients still say they have gone from a more traditional view to those who followed the traditional view because they were told to do so, versus a generation of millennials who have pushed back on that as well. And I think too, from a global standpoint, our access to television and access to traveling globally, right? I mean, I lived overseas, and so I have a much broader view of the global world than my parents had access to because they didn't have a chance to travel and live globally, right? So that really changes everything. And that's why we see that evolution in all different countries. So now, I didn't want to harp too much on the birth years of each group because there's not one governing body that says, these are the generations, okay? That doesn't exist. It's just about the research that is done and how that bubbles to the top, okay? The research that becomes the most popular and the most validated by other researchers and whatnot. So it's not as much about your birth year. Don't argue with people over that. Now, I will say I was born in 1981, so I am one of the oldest millennials by almost everybody's standards and different birth year cutoffs. But I will tell you, I am a millennial by mindset. It's not about the birth year. It's that I think like a millennial, and I was raised with millennial experiences, which is what I'll explain in just a moment. Now, my sister is 6 years older than me, and she's very Gen X. She is very play by the rules. Because I said so, you know, I will do what my boss tells me, where I was kind of the opposite and pushed back a lot and said, why? Why do you have that policy when it's so out of date? why, if that doesn't matter, do you still hold on to a traditional belief that is no longer rooted in a reason, right? It's just because of tradition, where my sister holds on to more tradition and respects that more than I do because of the time in which I was raised and different experiences. Okay. Now, please don't get generational differences. Do not mistake those with your life stage, because there's also, after adolescence, you're a child, and then you're in adolescence during your teenage years. And then they used to just say, then you go straight to adulthood at 18, bam. But really, we have found now that there's a new stage called emerging adulthood between about age 18 and 26. And this is oftentimes because people are living longer. And in the millennial generation in particular, we're waiting to have obligations in our lives, right? So we're waiting to get married. We're waiting to have children. We're waiting to have a mortgage and to own a home. We're waiting on those things because then in our 20s, we can have freedom and choice and really change jobs and try different industries and do things. So something to keep in mind here is that part of the reason for this emerging adulthood stage of life, it isn't just because they're just young and dumb, all right? It's because their prefrontal cortex, right here, the last part of your brain to develop is your prefrontal cortex. And that is where you get the wires where you think of others before yourself. So most 22-year-olds are going to be selfish and self-focused because they don't have the wiring yet in their brain to think of others before themselves, or to think long-term like retirement versus short-term like how much money am I getting on Friday and can I access it today? That's kind of how we are wired during that time frame until your prefrontal cortex really settles in there. Okay, so that, please don't mistake that true brain development and level of immaturity that we have as growing humans. Don't mistake that with, oh, they're so millennial, or that's so Gen Z. One of the issues I have with evaluating Generation Z, which is that group under 25, is they don't yet have the prefrontal cortex fully developed. And so it's hard to say who they are going to be as adults versus emerging adults because they have not reached that age and we don't yet have the data from a workforce standpoint. Okay, so something else to really consider there. Now, in the Millennial Mindset book, I walk through TABLE, which are 5 ways that the generational dynamics show up in the workplace. And it stands for technology, authority, work-life balance, loyalty, and entitlement. So I just wanted to share one story from the book and make sure that everybody understands this word loyalty is very tricky because a lot of younger folks in our workforce don't even know what loyalty looks like. In fact, I myself and many of my friends, we never saw it growing up. Now, in the US, divorce peaked in the 1980s. So we saw our parents split during those formative years. Then in the 1990s, the internet came into corporate America and caused globalization. So we saw a lot more companies offshore and outsource their jobs. Now, after my parents split when I was 11, my mom lost her job as a corporate accountant 3 times because her entire department would be eliminated and sent elsewhere. All right. So there was nothing my mom could do. She was a great employee, always got stellar performance reviews, but her entire department, including her own boss, lost their jobs. So when you are a 15-year-old girl and your single mom comes walking through the front door with tears and that box where they send you home with all the stuff from your desk, it's going to give you a whole different perspective on company loyalty. So we saw this happen over and over, where our parents and our aunts and uncles and friends, they got the raw end of the loyalty deal. Okay. And now we say to young people, or we say about young people, they have no loyalty, they have no commitment. And yet my grandfather had a pension. He was promised money for him and my grandmother. As long as he stayed at a company, they would take care of them for the rest of their lives. Well, in many countries and in most companies, those long-term commitments and benefits are gone. And so companies, in many cases, are actually the ones who broke the commitment first and said, no, we're not going to take care of you forever. This is just a mutually beneficial relationship. You work for me, you get a paycheck. That's all I can promise you right now, because if things get tough, we're going to have to let you go, right? We're going to have to eliminate some positions in that situation. So we have seen it, right? We've all known people. If we weren't the ones who lost our jobs, we know people. We were impacted by people that lost their jobs. So we have to be careful with this loyalty word, because we really need to think about our workforce differently. That it's not just that they aren't loyal, it's that a lot of the workforce doesn't even know what that looks like and is truly not given the incentives to stay loyal at their company. Okay. So really important thing to think about. Now I encourage you, after hearing that example, and if you take a look, I've got the backstory, like I said, TABLE, of why millennials are more comfortable with change. Why do people respect authority more than other people? You know, those types of things. Why is it that the younger generations tend to be so much more entitled? And spoiler alert, it's because we have access to everything when we want it. Okay. So our whole society has become entitled because we have credit cards, we have the internet, we have delivery services, things like that, to where we can get what we want when we want it in most countries around the world today. Okay. So we have to think about our worldview. What have we experienced and how do we see things? What is our lens when we are working with and managing others, or trying to recruit and retain others, to then be able to realize, wow, the people that I am recruiting and retaining, they have a different worldview. They have a different upbringing and a different background of how they think and how they see things. All right. So I encourage you, one thing to do to help bridge the generational gaps, and go ahead and start putting in any questions that you have into the Q&A and chat. So I'm going to wrap up here on this part. But one quick, immediately actionable thing is to genuinely check in with your people. This helps both from the generational standpoint to help understand people who think differently than you. And it also helps with the retention side to help you understand as a leader where folks are coming from, what is frustrating them, what do they love about their job, what is a struggle or challenge within their position, and to make sure that you are mentoring them and supporting them as best you can. You should end almost every conversation with, how can I support you, right? How can I help you in your role? Is there anything you need from me, right? If we can take that stance as leaders, that is critical, along with what I said earlier about communicate your expectations. Because remember, I didn't know I had to keep my shoes on until someone came and communicated that. As crazy as that might sound, they had to communicate those expectations to me. Okay. So yeah, Megan, TABLE stands for technology, authority, balance, like work-life balance, loyalty, and entitlement. Those are 5 of the ways that we see the generational dynamics showing up over and over and over again in the workplace. So, all right, Ron asked a question of, how has your view on all of this been influenced by the big wave of remote work? Oh my goodness. So a lot of my work is in healthcare and hospitality and construction, different areas where you have to be at a certain place at a certain time, right? So what I'm seeing right now is that there's a lot of let me think about this for a second. The workforce has realized that there are tethered jobs and there are untethered jobs. So if we think about, if we have to be at the front desk, or if we're a room attendant, or, we have to be on the golf course or whatever, right? We have to be at a certain place at a certain time. That's considered a tethered position. Then there are other jobs that can be done from home, whether that's more of your administrative and finance type of work that, sometimes can be done off-site, or it's completely different competitive jobs. I mean, how many people leave hospitality to go DoorDash? that job, that untethered world didn't really exist 10 years ago or 15 years ago, where people could just quit their job at 3 o'clock and they could go drive and make money that evening doing something totally different. All right. So I will tell you, especially from a finance standpoint, I believe that the tethered roles, because people talk, right? People talk to each other. Well, how flexible is your job? How hard is your job? How much do you make? They talk about those things. So I predict that tethered positions are going to increase in labor costs moving forward, because for a tethered position, you are asking someone to sacrifice their flexibility, to sacrifice things at home, and they're gonna demand more money for that. If they can have the flexibility and work somewhere else remotely or from home or whatnot, they will take less money. All kinds of statistics are showing us now they'll take less money to have that flexibility, which means we're going to have to predict proper, appropriate recruiting costs and pay costs on that piece. Okay. So just a heads up for you. I know that's not what you want to hear, but that to me is a definite distinction moving forward. And also, it's not, I hear sometimes that people say, well, it's not fair that certain departments can work from home and certain departments can't. But a lot of times those more administrative positions, like HR or IT or finance or something like that, those positions, if you look at the competition for HR professionals, the competition for finance and IT and things like that, it's almost impossible to hire someone in those particular roles without giving them the flexibility. So while you may say, you may have some on-site staff say, oh, that's not fair that they can work from home and I can't. But it is just a difference in the profession, in their job responsibilities and their roles. So again, mentorship is where we have to go. All right. In helping people understand, it isn't about the company policy of everyone being here or not. It's more about roles and responsibilities and what does that position offer as far as flexibility goes with their role. Can they do it elsewhere? Okay. So Claire said, there are challenges with employees feeling entitled to work remotely. When does that mindset change? Okay, so the problem is we've let the cat out of the bag. We have shown people now what can be done because of the pandemic. We've shown them what can be done from home, and there's no going back now. So the problem is when I see organizations say, you have to come back to work, oftentimes what I'm actually seeing when I dig down deep, and Claire, I don't know if this is what's happening at your organization or not. This has just been my experience talking with leaders at all different organizations. Oftentimes the reason leaders want people on site back at the office or back on the property, okay, is because the management has only been trained to manage on-site workers. And so a lot of times the piece that's missing is, well, I don't know how to manage somebody who's not here, because to me, if they're on site, they're being productive. And that's how I know how to measure productivity. When in reality, somebody who's working from home could be a lot more productive because they don't have as many disruptions. They don't have the commute time or even getting dressed and makeup and hair every day, right? I mean, I save that time too sometimes. So a lot of times, not everybody's more productive at home, but some people are. And so a lot of the piece that I see missing is, can the management handle a hybrid workforce? And have they been trained and given the tools to be successful at that? Okay, so even, this is one of the strategies we teach all the time is management training is critical, and giving people those assessments, whether it's behavioral style assessments. We also offer a work from home assessment that helps people identify who would be or would not be a good candidate for working from home. There's motivator assessments, there's emotional intelligence assessments, right? We need to look at our leaders and make sure that we have truly given them those tools that they need to be successful managing hybrid workers, if that's going to be an option. Okay, so awesome. All right, so Victoria, I'll let you wrap things up here, but I'm on LinkedIn. Please reach out if I didn't have a chance to answer your question today, or you're listening to the playback later. Please don't hesitate to send me your questions, comments, challenges, or success stories down the road. So thank you all so much.
What a riveting session, Kara. And Kara is with Magnet Culture, and we also want to thank Josh Bergen with Venza for coordinating this session today. Do either one of you have any last comments for the group?
Hang in there. I know things are tough right now. My heart goes out to you of filling all these positions and things, but I'm sending strength on the days that you think you're running out. So hang in there, keep doing what you're doing, and thank you so much for your leadership on your teams.
We want to hear things that you've learned. What's kept you going? Who's inspired you? We want to engage that part of your journey in this program, leadership program. Please continue today's discussion with the online leadership community, and mark your calendar for next month's leadership lecture, focusing on career paths, the long and winding road. You will hear from 3 industry leaders on their choices, opportunities missed, and insights learned along their career paths. Scott Campbell, Lyle Worthington, and Shannon McCallum will be joining us on that panel. And as a special update, we will have an industry celebrity moderating the panel. So watch the community for more details on this session, and registration will be open soon. This closes today's event, and I hope you learned a lot as I did. And we'll see you in the community and online next month.